Up until the end of Season 4, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss had followed the books of A Song of Ice and Fire to a T, mostly. But then the Season 5 trailer dropped and showed Jaime in Dorne. This was, in my opinion, the first time they altered the story in a major way, and if you've read the title of this video, you can work out that the cracks in Game of Thrones began to show literally the first time they went off course. Hello and welcome to another video. Game of Thrones may be finished, and the less said about that the better, but with 2 books still to come, eventually, and a spin-off in the works, I think now is a good time to drag this dead horse out one more time, before the new episodes are either really brilliant, or so bad that people forget Game of Thrones was ever good.
Well, Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
Now, obviously many book characters and events have been left out of the show. Some fans would have liked to see Satin or Strong Belwas. George R.R. Martin said that the show really needed Garland Tyrell. Personally, I would have liked to see the Kettlebacks, a trio of guards that Tyrion and Cersei both tried to get as their secret agents, with Cersei eventually triumphing due to her womanly ways. As fun as it is watching Tyrion run rings around everyone in Season 2 and 3, it would make the audience appreciate the efforts he goes through to win much more if there's one time he loses, although I do get why adding triplets to an already huge cast wouldn't work. Anyway, like I was saying, by the end of Season 4 the stories have still very loyally followed the books. I actually saw the reaction before I saw the trailer. Why is Jaime in Dorne? I got a sinking feeling in my stomach, and then the opening credits of Season 5 happened, and what the hell is this? The city isn't called Dorne. They never called Winterfell the North. It's either the Water Gardens or Sunspear. We then met the Sand Snakes, who seemed impressive for the first scene, before we all realised they were one-dimensional pieces of wood with frowny faces drawn on them. Dorne seemed wise at first, talking about peace, and then that's all he ever talked about. No master plan, no secret friends waiting for the moment to strike. There was no Quentyn, who has a much more entertaining story than Trystane. There was no Arianna, who has a much more entertaining story than Illyria. It was as if Dorne was created to give Jaime something to do for that season. Why else would every Dornish character be killed off before they made any difference in the world whatsoever? So if you'll indulge me for the next 10 or so minutes, I'll explain to you why Dorne was so bad. And I know I just told you why it was so bad, but it was so bad because it could have been so much more. Doran Martell is first introduced in the books alongside Areo Hotah, and if you don't know who he is, he's the one who did nothing and then died from pussy. But you're gonna love Book Hotah. He's with Doran in the Water Gardens, watching the children play. Doran can't move a muscle on his body because every joint is puffed up with gout, but he knows his time relaxing is over because his nation calls for blood, and it needs a leader. On the way to Sunspear, we meet all 3 sand snakes, and wow, they have personalities. This wasn't in the show. Okay, I'll admit, Obara's personality is exactly the same as she is in the show, but when her sisters are different, that's okay. Tyene Sand in particular is very eye-opening, even if she's speaking Arianna's words. She suggests not killing anyone, but instead seceding by crowning Myrcella as queen, since she's older than Tommen and there's no patriarchy in Dorne. And the beauty of the plan is that Cersei would have to send armies to remove her own daughter from the throne, and it's also well known that she's been fighting for women's rights her whole life, and would then be forced to admit that a woman couldn't rule. Thus, no invasion of Dorne would be fully backed, and the half-army that does get sent would perish in the desert, receiving no help from the hesitant queen in King's Landing. Like in the show, Doran initially seems a very passive, peace-loving type. However, there's more to his words than simple tranquility. He says, "Words are like arrows, Arianna. Once loose, they can never be taken back." And a little bit of plotting slips out even when Doran is amongst those he doesn't know he can trust to keep their mouths shut. He says, "He went beyond anything I asked of him. Take measure of this boy king and his council, and make note of their strengths and weaknesses, I asked him." And the pronoun in that sentence is the one and only Oberyn Martell. We learn that Doran has been trying to wed Arianna to old men her entire life. The book name drops Walder Frey, so you know that's the quality of man Doran's been sending her to. But he always made sure that Arianna knew it was her choice to get married and could refuse if she wanted to. However, it's also revealed that she found a letter to her little brother Quentyn that Doran intended him to be the heir of Sunspear. Arianna knows that Quentyn's crossed the Narrow Sea as well, in disguise, and thinks he's coming back with the Golden Company to remove her from her birthright. I'm just going to spoil this now. The reason Quentyn was going to be in charge of Dorne was because Arianna was not going to marry an old man. That was just a distraction so the world would think Dorne is behaving normally, and by only choosing the worst suitors, Arianna would always say no. Arianna was going to marry the king, Viserys Targaryen. Like I said, much more interesting than Trystane, who's 12 in the books. He and Myrcella spend their days playing together, with their servants bringing them a new thing every now and then from the port. Later, we get a chapter from the point of view of Aerys Oakheart, the Kingsguard assigned to protect Myrcella, and almost instantly we discover that Arianna Martell has used her womanly ways to turn him. Anyway, Arianna goes ahead with her plan to crown Myrcella. She has a team of people she trusts, which includes a knight that says if they want to start a war, they should just kill the princess. Aerys arrives with the smuggled out Myrcella, and they trek across the desert at night and plan to get to friendly territory. However, guards come out of nowhere with Erio Hotar, and instead of being killed by this guy straight up chops off the arm of Kingsguard Aerys before taking off his head as well. Unfortunately, that one knight who wanted to unalive Myrcella is still there, and he half succeeds, cutting half the girl's face off. Later, after Arianna has almost gone insane from isolation, she meets with Dorne, and his words are very different from before. He says, "My brother loved to fight for its own sake, but I only play games that I can win." And then, 681 pages after we first meet the wheelchair-bound, practically paralysed old man who spends his days watching children half asleep, he finally says, "I have worked at the downfall of Tywin Lannister since the day they told me of Elia and her children. It was my hope to strip him of all he held most dear before I killed him." Arianna still accuses Dorne of hating her, saying she knows that Quentyn has gone to gather an army. Well, remember when I said that Dorne wanted Arianna to marry the oldest living Targaryen? He replies to her with, "Quentyn has a much harder road to walk. He has gone to bring us back our heart's desire." Prince Dorne pressed the onyx dragon into her palm and whispered, "Fire and blood." The last chapter we see Dorne in is only 15 pages long, and yet in that time he gets his hands on the skull of the mountain, but knows it's a fake. He foils Cersei's assassination attempt of Trystane. The Queen invited the young prince and her daughter to King's Landing, but plans to set up an ambush on the road with fake bandits shouting for Tyrion, and only Trystane would perish from it. So Dorne says they'll travel by sea instead. He then gathers the Sand Snakes, who I'll remind you have personalities in the books, and reveals his master plan. He sends moody fighter Obara with Balon Swan, the Kingsguard who brought the Mountain's Head, to hunt the knight who tried to stab Myrcella. They also claim he's the one who killed Aerys, and if you're wondering who this knight is, well, he's actually this guy's grandson, so won't it be believable when it turns out that he's managed to kill a second Kingsguard? Nymeria and Tyene will go to King's Landing, with scheming Nymeria taking Oberyn's place on the small council, and sweet-looking Tyene getting in with the High Sparrow. He says to the girls he knows people think he's old and weak, but Oberyn was the viper, and Dorne is the grass that hides him. If you've managed to listen to my voice talk about the books for this long, then surely you must agree that it's a far more interesting development than what the show does to the south. What made the show so gripping was that every side, every player was a credible threat. Everyone had to be on alert at all times because everything could change in a moment. Dorne was nothing but useless in the show. In the books, they fought with each other and came out the other side united and stronger. In the shows, they fought each other and died. Like I said earlier, the less said about that, the better.